All right. Hello, everyone. Just going to give it a couple of minutes before we get started in today's webinar. So as usual, in the interim, please put your name and where you're from in the chat so we can all kind of start to get to know each other and see where everyone is from. Casey from Tulsa. How are you, Casey? Everyone, if you can, please put your name. We're going to get ready soon, but a couple of minutes or so at most. But please put your name. We would love to know where everyone's from. Hello. Okay, there we go. Jennifer from Norfolk. How are you? Angie from Twin Falls, Idaho. Love Idaho. Casey, very excited. Awesome. We are too. Laura from Milwaukee. Enrico, sorry, from Indianapolis. Marie from Pennsylvania. Tara from Ontario. Hello, hello. Brad from Vanover. How are you? Perfect. Richard from the UK. Wow, quite the group here. Rhode Island. Bill, nice to see you. Heidi from Kentucky. Shannon from Phoenix. That's fantastic. It's quite the range we got going here. Let's give it a couple more minutes, another minute or two, and then we'll get started with Matt and JP. Shannon from Phoenix. Awesome group here. All right. Okay. Let's get this webinar started then. I'll start with a brief introduction first. So hi, everyone. I'd like to get started now. So my name's Adrian, and I'm the marketing manager at IHHP. We want to thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us today and welcome you to our webinar. Today's webinar is called Inspire Greatness, Developing Your Organization's Leadership Potential. Now, before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about us. IHHP is a global leader in emotional intelligence training and development with over 25 years of experience helping organizations build high-performance cultures. Our solutions are rooted in neuroscience, blending cutting-edge research with practical strategies that leaders can apply under pressure. Our mission is to empower leaders to excel by helping them harness the full potential of emotional intelligence, creating resilient teams, and fostering cultures of performance, engagement, innovation, and connection. Now, as we get started, I'd like to ask you all to please put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll take them along the way. And to help us get started today, I'm going to introduce leadership expert Matt Tenney and our founder and keynote speaker, Dr. JP Pawliw-Fry. Now, Matt Tenney is the author of 3 leadership books, including Inspire Greatness, How to Motivate Employees with a Simple, Repeatable, Scalable Process. And his inspiring TED Talk has been viewed by over 1 million, been viewed over 1 million times. Now, since 2014, Matt has delivered programs that help develop world-class leaders who improve engagement, retention, and performance to hundreds of clients, including companies like Salesforce, Marriott, United Airlines, L'Oreal, Canon, and Signet Jewelers. Now, our very own JP is the co-author of a New York Times bestselling book, Performing Under Pressure. JP is a trusted advisor to Fortune 500 companies, NFL and NBA teams, and Navy SEALs. He spent decades helping leaders and athletes excel in high-stakes moments. To achieve your ambitious goals, you need people to take risks, and that will only happen if you have the right environment of high care and high accountability. And this is the inspiration you'll get from Dr. JP Pawliw-Fry. So without further ado, now let's get started.
I don't hear anybody like clapping or giving any big yahoos there, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian, and welcome, Matt. Great to have you here. Excited to spend, in a sense, we get to have a conversation about stuff we love, and hopefully there's some value for folks. And of course, I'm joking. We're here to serve others, but we love this work so much that I think we're going to go into some neat areas, and I'm excited to do it with you. Your third book, Inspire Greatness. Wow, tell us a little bit about.
I do agree, JP, in terms of how much we love our work. I would imagine you would agree with this, but I've told people, I will give my keynote basically to anyone who will listen. Sometimes it happens on the airplane on the way to go to an event. I would talk about this to anyone who is willing to listen. Yeah, so this is great. Hopefully it does add a lot of value for your
You know,
your
it's funny.
audience.
I was just going to ask you about the book that you're third, but I'm actually going to start with a different question because, you know, in a sense, the story arc, you know, people are here and they want to know, how can we develop our leaders? How can we build better cultures? Right? That's why somebody would take an hour, and thank you everyone for taking the hour to invest in this. But something's getting in the way, right? We're challenged in terms of moving the needle. So I want to start actually with a question around that because I know that's where the book came from in a sense. So let's start with more, you know, kind of going backwards in some ways. How have we done over the last 25 years in terms of engagement and our investment in engagement? It's a bit of a softball question, I realize, but it's a great place to start.
Yeah, well, I would actually be kind of curious. Maybe people can put this in the chat. Let me set this up, some context here to give you an idea of how much we invest in this. So Gallup started measuring engagement a little over 20 years ago, 22 or so years ago. Um, and it's intuitively we've known how important this is, right? We've known forever that but you basically if you're a very senior leader, you have two primary responsibilities, right? You create a vision of the future, you set out a strategy for making that vision become a reality, and then you need to inspire people to execute on that strategy, right? And I would argue that if you can't inspire people to execute on the strategy, strategy is of very little value, right? So I would say it's more important to have people who are inspired to come to work every day to execute with energy on that strategy. So we've known for a long time how important this is. Gallup just happened to quantify it, right? And when they first started measuring engagement, I think after the first year, it went up just a touch. But it was roughly 1 out of 3 people were engaged at work in the US. The numbers outside of the US, I think Canada was pretty similar, but outside of North America, the numbers were significantly worse, actually. It was maybe like 1 out of every 5 people were engaged at work. So because we know it's important, because we now have some valid assessment tools to measure this, or some valid surveys to measure engagement in a way that's meaningful, over the last 20 years, I mean, almost every organization has put some thought into how do we improve this. Many organizations have invested a lot of time and resources in things like employee engagement surveys, in leadership development, trying to improve employee engagement. So I'd just like to pose to the audience, maybe, just kind of see without, please don't use Google. Let's just go off the top of your head. So as one more piece of context here, we actually know exactly what drives employee engagement. So we have decades of research from Gallup and other researchers that have made it very clear exactly what drives employee engagement. So we have this amazing combination of knowing exactly what drives employee engagement. US companies alone have invested hundreds of billions of dollars and a tremendous amount of time over the last 20 years trying to improve employee engagement. Let's hear from the audience. How much progress do you think we've made in the last 20 years? So we were 1 out of 3 people engaged in the US 20 years ago. What do you think it is the last time Gallup published their numbers?
Yeah. So go into the chat and, what is it now? Maybe it's 1 in 3, maybe it's 1 in 2, maybe it's more or less. I'd love to thank
Oh,
you.
thanks. I'm seeing a lot of answers. A lot of people think it's coming down, actually. I'm seeing some 1 in 6s, 1 in 5s. You're on the right track. I did actually see a same. And that's the correct answer, my friend. So the last numbers published from Gallup, it was 32% in the United States. 1 out of 3 people roughly are engaged at work. And this to me is kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
When you know exactly what drives employee engagement, you invest a ton of time and money in trying to improve it. And over 20 years, on average, now, of course, there are some organizations that have made great progress, but on average, we've seen no progress in 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of shocking, isn't it?
It is. It's
Like
frustrating, I think, for a lot of people too.
Yeah. Now the one thing that I know we'll get to in terms of what are the drivers, but there are uncontrollables as well outside in the world, in the economy, that is a little harder to obviously control. So, I guess my mind goes to, of the things you can control, do you know if we kind of, segment the data, if those things have gone up? Like, is it an externality, right? Society, the world, etc., the economy, whatever, versus the internal. And maybe you don't, I don't know that. So I'm actually more asking out of curiosity, because that's where my mind goes to a little
Yeah,
bit.
I don't know with certainty. I would say with confidence that, the way Gallup aggregates its data is taking data from their clients
Right.
over, and people do surveys at all different times of the year.
Yep.
So, if you have external factors which are affecting the data, it should be random. So I think this is clearly a sign that we're not effective at consistently doing the things that
Yeah.
drive high levels of employee engagement that we do have control over. Because
Yeah.
you'll see swings up and down. Like, for
For sure.
instance, during the COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
engagement actually went up a little bit. In fact, it reached the highest point
I
in
know
that
that was
20-year
interesting.
period.
Yeah.
And I suspect a large part of that was that a huge driver of being engaged is autonomy. It's
Yeah.
one of the most powerful drivers, right? And so all of a sudden you have people saying, I control my whole day. I can
Yeah.
work from home. I can go do the
Yeah.
laundry on a break. I can take my kids to
Yeah.
school. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, everyone got the autonomy they've always dreamed of for a
Yeah.
while, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So Matt, I mean, we've got so much to talk here, but just on that point, what's your sense? I think this is something that begs the question. So what are your thoughts about Amazon and some of these other organizations saying, hey, back to the office, return RTO, return to office?
Yeah. Well, I think every culture is going to be a little bit different, but I think as a general rule, um, anytime you dictate a policy, whether it's we're all in the office, whether it's you have to come in 3 days a week, you have to come in 2 days a week, I think that's stripping people of their autonomy and to some extent their dignity. You know, People are adults, and if I think one of the biggest problems that we have in just about every workplace culture, not necessarily across entire organizations, but pockets of organizations here and there, sometimes it's the entire organization, is particularly in the West, is that we are obsessed with activity.
Mm,
What we should be obsessed with is results.
mm.
And so if we're measuring activity, it's really hard to do when people are not in the office, right? You can't
Right.
see them physically at their desk. So I think
True.
as leaders, if we took the time to have the short-term investment of saying, let's get crystal clear on our strategic objectives at the C-suite level. Let's take the time to cascade those down to every team and make sure every individual knows how they're going to make an impact in furtherance of executing that strategy. Now, it doesn't matter. I don't care if somebody, like on my team, I don't care if somebody works 25 hours a week or 40. In fact, I would prefer they work less so they have more time with their families, provided that they're getting the results. If they're not getting the results, then we have to have a conversation about, well, is there something in your way? Are there ways we could help you to be more efficient? Is there a tool that you're lacking that you need? So I think, if we do that, if we really make this shift to focusing on measuring results instead of measuring activity, that frees us up a little bit to say, I don't care whether you come to the office or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
You make the decision. What's going to help you be
Yeah.
most effective at achieving the goals that we agreed on together?
Yeah.
Now, that's easier said than done. But
For
I
sure.
think when you move in that, and Gallup's research actually supports this. Like, what people want is not 1 day in the office or 2 or 3. What they want is the autonomy to decide for themselves.
Yeah.
That's what people want.
Yeah. And what's interesting, and I don't necessarily disagree, but there's a nuance. And this webinar is not about RTO, but I think it brings up a couple of interesting points, which is that before the pandemic, or let's say before any major, or before RTO, you could say before, there's a major kind of critical incident. It's, how do I say this? People can be swimming naked, right? It's the old story, right? when the water goes out, you sit there and you see who's swimming naked. And I think a lot of cultures have been found out that aren't doing very well. Maybe they're getting some results because of some macro or they've got some market position, but they've been found out a little bit. And so what I feel like I've seen is this is really identify those organizations that have that kind of really high care, high in our world, high care, high accountability culture that drives performance, and those that don't, that there's some other factors at work. So that's one thought. But the other piece I wanted to say is it's interesting, and I agree with you around data. There is some data to show that with that autonomy, that decrease in commuting time, productivity has gone up. In fact, there's no question about that as a data point. But innovation has not necessarily gone up. And there's a real question, maybe it's even come down because there's not as much connection and collaboration. Do you see the differences? Right. And that's where that's where it's harder. So I agree with you around autonomy, but then it's, well, what do we do around the need for people to be connected so that they can do and collaborate so they can do innovative work, not just productive work? Because those are two different kind of criteria. Anyway, any thoughts on that before
Oh,
I?
yeah. There's no question. Strategic thinking and innovation, that there needs to be a lot of intentionality around how to
Right.
get people together to do that, because like usually the best ideas that lead to innovation come from, a group setting. Then people break off, do their own deep thought,
Yeah.
and that's where you start coming to something that has the potential to be innovative.
Right.
But then to actually have to me, innovation is not just a novel idea. I mean, those are a dime a dozen. It's something that's
Right.
adding value,
Yeah.
that's actually brought to fruition.
Yeah.
That takes a lot. That takes a lot of collaboration. Yeah. So
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
there has to be a lot of intentionality around how to do that if it's
Yeah.
not in an in-person setting.
Yeah. And then I would say this, that's why we need a good culture to have the conversations to decide how are we going to deal with these big events, whether it be COVID, RTO, whatever. And
Yeah,
so,
I just think that the big point that I was trying to make is
yeah,
that I don't think that there's a right answer or wrong
right.
answer for any particular
Sure.
culture. What I think is the key move is if you give people the autonomy to decide for themselves, if you have the right culture, people will make the right decision.
Yeah.
They'll come to it on their own. Instead of dictating, you need to do this,
Yeah.
they'll say, look, in order for us to achieve what you want us to achieve, we need to get together in the office once a week.
Right.
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 People can do that on their own. They don't need a policy telling them to do
Yeah.
that. That's all I'm saying is that,
No, fair enough.
yeah, if you
And
if
it's
you
kind of,
give people autonomy, they'll surprise you with,
yeah.
what they can achieve.
Well, and I mean, you're putting the responsibility on them. And Richard makes a great point in the chat. He said, autonomy can happen in the office. It's not really, and this is almost your point too. It's not about in the office, not in the office, but it's about people making some decisions. So let me kind of go back. I mean, you and I could talk about a lot of things, but let me ask you this, Matt. Like when you think of, we've not moved the needle. Yes, there's some external factors, but let's assume that, what we're doing is not working. So riff on that. Tell us what you think. Like, why is it not working? What are we doing that's not working in terms of leadership, engagement, culture from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and the issue is that all three of them are deeply interconnected. So a lot of people have solved one of each of these three
Mm,
things, but if we don't solve them all simultaneously, then there's always water leaking out of a hole that we haven't
right.
filled in that bucket, right? So the first one is pretty simple. It's a perception issue that all things culture, i.e., engagement, retention, um, satisfaction, all this stuff, that's HR stuff, right? And so a lot of times engagement gets, and many times I would say, in fact, probably the vast majority of times, engagement and everything else related to culture gets delegated to the
Mm,
HR team. And the problem with that is that although HR is an absolutely essential partner in the process of creating a great culture, and perhaps one of the most important partners any leader can have, um, the data is really clear on this. 70%, at least, I think this is actually very conservative. 70% of employee engagement is driven by people's direct managers.
Yeah.
So that's problem number one. If we're
Yeah.
not, if leaders aren't taking responsibility for engagement, we're doomed to failure because engagement is not an HR thing. It is a leadership thing.
Right.
So that's part one. Part two is even when we know, most surveys will tell you this. If you do an employee engagement survey, it tells you, well, it looks like the problem is your leaders aren't that effective. Well, I could have told you that without a survey. Like, 70% of engagement is driven. We know this. It's intuitive. Intuitively, I think we know this. But even when we really focus in on developing leaders, the way that leadership development is traditionally done has been proven to be very ineffective as a whole. Of course, there are some people doing it very well. Maybe I'll just hit all three and then you can dive deeper in any one you want. And then the third one is the way that we get the data is the tendency is to do a big annual survey with 40, 50 questions on it. And by the nature of collecting a whole bunch of data at once, it makes it very hard it takes time to make meaning of the data. It takes time to come up with a plan for how we're going to respond to the data with meaningful action. This is not an exaggeration. I have worked with organizations where I come in roughly a year after their last employee engagement survey, and they're just now starting to take action at the manager level in response to last year's survey. The longer that there's a delay between employees giving feedback and feeling heard and seeing meaningful action, it's actually hurting engagement with every day that goes by. Trust is going down, engagement is going down. So the problem is, like, all three of these things are so interconnected that if we don't fix all three, it's really hard to move the needle. So that's my view on why we haven't moved the needle in 20 years. Those are the three principal drivers.
Yeah. When people take the time to fill in an engagement or any survey and they don't see any real response from leaders to say, hey, first of all, thank you for the feedback, much less here's what we're going to do. Like, just really as the first hack, maybe for everyone listening, if you're a manager or leader in some way, shape, or form, if you ask for feedback from folks, please pause at some point very soon, and the sooner the better, and say thank you. And put some time in to figure out what are you going to do with that data, or else that actually can become, it's almost like that's a mini test of how serious you are about, are you just doing the survey because we were supposed to do a survey, or are you serious about it? Do you actually care? And that care part, really matters. It was interesting. Just before this call, I was on coaching the CEO of a, kind of a pretty large company, 55,000 employees. And they're a global organization in the automotive sector. And he was saying that they got some feedback that they'd like to have some non-North American sports examples at conferences and in communication. And he's a, real kind of a guy who's really into football, American, lovely guy. Actually, he said, if you said, what's a typical American? He said, I would be the picture of a typical American, right? I loved his kind of self-awareness, but also his humility. And he's like, okay. And so they're bringing someone in from, overseas at the next January event. And it's just interesting because for people, even that seems so minuscule, like it seems, oh, so what? It's just speaker at an event. But people feel heard. People said something. He listened. And by the way, for all the leaders out there, it doesn't mean you always have to agree. That's not the point. But people need to feel heard. That's one of their emotional needs, right? To do great work, we need to have our emotional needs met. What do I mean by that? We need to feel listened to. We need to feel valued. We need to have autonomy. We need to feel safe. We need to feel respected. There's about 6 kind of core needs that we have. And when those are met for each of us, we will do our best work. We will take risks. Risk taking is huge. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But, I'll just say now, for a team to be high performing, it needs to take risks. There's no question. That's probably the best finding we have right now around high performance. But at the very same time that, we have this vector that says to be high performer, we need to take risks. We have another vector that says, everyone's brain is saying, especially under pressure, default to protection, not risk. And so there's this tension inside every individual on your team. And you will not be high performing unless you get underneath. We call this the fundamental conflict of performance. If you don't get over this fundamental conflict, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's where this, the work that Matt and, and we're doing, it really matters. So you got to get underneath that in order for people to take risks, to do great things. And so just something as simple, coming all the way back, if it's a year later that you're actually starting to act on your engagement survey, I mean, what does that signal in terms of we care about your voice? So it's even how you do it. And I think that's a big part of some of your work, which I think it'd be great to hear more about, Matt, because I think what you've done is you've said, okay, do we need to do, and God help me if there's 50 questions out there. I haven't seen too many, but I know some do, but that are like a battery of 50 items, like in terms of, fatigue, answering fatigue, et cetera. That's just horrible methodology. But that aside, you said, hey, maybe let's throw that out. Maybe that doesn't work. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your process around that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I do want to caveat that by saying, there's a lot of people that do an annual survey for the primary purpose of earning some type of best place to work award. And
Sure.
And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't do an annual survey, just to make that clear. I think it's better if you don't. But if you're committed to doing one, if you have to do one, it's fine. But it's good to augment it with the approach that I'll share in a moment. And one of the reasons is just simple data validity and reliability. You had mentioned this earlier about external factors. This is something that comes up all the time in discussions. You ask somebody, well, when you're doing an annual survey, what time of year do you do it? And they say, well, you can't do it right after Christmas because everyone's depressed. That'll hurt your numbers. You can't do it like in the springtime because that's conference season and we're so busy. That'll skew the numbers. But people have to really put a lot of thought into when they do it. And of course, this to me begs the question, well, how valid is that data? If you're just taking a snapshot once a year, it's not really telling you a whole lot, even if your questions are great. Whereas if you're getting regular feedback,
right,
you can see trends over time. Are external factors going to affect the data? Of course, but you can draw a line through the undulations and the ups and downs and see trends. And the trends are much more predictive of what's happening, much more reliable data than a snapshot in a moment of time. So that being said, for people who are going to do one, again, I think it doesn't have to be the kiss of death, but I think it's almost certain that we should be doing frequent kind of pulse feedback surveys in between. So the approach that I suggest here to kind of solve the three issues that we described it has 4 steps. And the first one is very much aligned with what you were just talking about in terms of how do we create an environment where people not only understand that risk-taking is important, but feel safe enough to do it. And that to me, it requires a fundamental shift in the mindset of leaders. So most junior managers, when they get promoted, the reason they get promoted is because they're really good at their jobs or they've been around a long time. And they view being a manager as more of an administrative function. Like, oh, okay, well, now I have to track people's hours. I have to submit for pay. I have to answer requests for vacation. It's a bunch of, their job description goes from a paragraph to 6 paragraphs of all these duties. And so I think we forget, or we're never trained to see that if we are a leader of people, our primary job is to inspire greatness in those people. Our primary job is to bring out the best in the people we lead. When we make the move from individual contributor to manager, we make the move from the person who's doing stuff to the person who is inspiring other people to do stuff. Now, of course, we're always going to have some degree of individual contributor type task that we have to execute on, unless you're, just a CEO with a very robust organization, that person should be doing nothing but, one-to-one meetings, talking with employees, setting strategy. But for most of us, we're always going to be doing something. So that to me is the first step, is we have to get leaders to realize, look, engagement is not an HR thing, it's a leadership thing. And my core job is to inspire engagement, because engagement and greatness to me are synonymous. What's the definition of an engaged employee? This is someone who they'll give discretionary effort. That means they'll go above and beyond expectations because they are emotionally invested in achieving the mission. Isn't that greatness? I mean, almost by definition. So the good news is, like, a lot of people hear this like, oh, the primary job is inspiring greatness. I can't do that. I'm not a natural born charismatic leader. Well, there's good news about this. There is a process, there's an algorithm to follow to consistently inspire greatness, which we're going to be talking about here. And yeah, so it starts with that simple recognition. And a hack that I love to share, and it warms my heart whenever I talk to people and I see in their Zoom background that they've done this. But what I recommend is just a simple first start. It sounds almost trite when you hear it, but this is so powerful. Is, take your current job description and print it up. I don't want you to go to HR, and some of you are probably on the HR team. It would be really annoying if everyone's asking HR to have their job descriptions changed. But just informally for yourself, if you print up your current job description as a leader, just write on the top of it, additional responsibilities. And then type and print up some variation of, my primary job is to inspire greatness in my team by serving as a coach who helps people to thrive. And by thrive, I mean to be good human beings who are happy and who do great work. All three of those things. You print that up, read it a few times a day, and it's not the secret. It's not like you're just going to like magically, change your mind. But every time you read it, I guarantee you for a few minutes, you're going to be in the mode of, what's something I could do 1% better to bring out the best in my team? And every time you do something, it starts changing your brain. And this is so important because there's so many pressures that compel us to focus on things other than bringing out the best in our teams. Part of it is just neurobiology, right? Like what feels better in the short term? To sit down and coach an employee, or to clean out your email inbox, or execute things on your to-do list? Those cleaning out your email inbox, executing your to-do list, that creates this dopamine cycle, right? Where every time we do a little something like that, we get this some type of opioid neurotransmitter that gives us a little hit of pleasure. And then dopamine comes in and compels us to go do that again. And so we can create this addictive cycle, really, where we're chasing the next hit of pleasure by seeing a quick win, right? And so we're kind of wired to seek these quick wins. Whereas the coaching, we don't get that quick hit. What we get over time, when we look back, we say, holy cow, do I feel fulfilled and satisfied at work? Because look at the people I've developed. So when we continually remind ourselves that that's our job, it makes us more resilient to the pressures, of, we got to hit quarterly numbers. I got to execute all this stuff on my list. And that's what we need. We just need to be resilient to start creating this new habit.
Yeah, what's interesting, Matt, is last point like you just mentioned, I think as pressure goes up, we start to feel it, oh, I've got to start knocking off my list. And most of us are type A folks, or we wouldn't be in this webinar, quite frankly. We're self-selected here. But the truth is that we can just feel so inundated, so overwhelmed that I think there's two things. I think people forget, oh yeah, part of my job is to coach and help develop people. Number one, genuinely. But number two, I think they're not entirely sure how to do it effectively. Like the number of times, we would do a program, and let's say it's to kick off a culture change system. And in our culture change system, a big part is we give this structure, we call it the sprint, to people leaders to own the culture on their team, not the CEO, not the CHRO. I totally agree with you on that. And it's amazing because you see these people leaders, they're busy, they're overwhelmed, but they actually do. I mean, really, most really want to have an engaged team, to have a team that's doing great things. when they find
And
that
they really care.
they care, they truly
It's
care.
just hard to live up to that
It
care that
is.
they aspire to
That's exactly it.
do.
And so I
Right.
think our job, your job, our job, so to speak, on the outside is how can we create, and this is almost like coming back to the whole point of this webinar, leadership and culture development is broken. Let's be really clear about that. And I could go into the data. The first one is just on engagement, which hasn't moved. But it's just right now, we are not doing a very good job. And by the way, we have less time to do it than ever. And by the way, taking people out to do a couple of days and nothing else around their development, I think most people know that doesn't work. It's got to be in the flow of work. It's got to be really bite size, micro learning, but that's not asynchronous micro learning on my own. But how about micro learning at the team level, right? With this structure.
Right.
That's like so important. And I just want to add one more thing that I've got a little bee in my bonnet around. I think when people think about leadership development, where I see it broken is that they think it's an internal capability inside the person. So let's spray and pray, hope it sticks, and now they've got some capabilities. But that's just not the science. The science says that for any one person, let's take risk taking, because we've talked about that. For any one person to take a risk on a team, for that person to take a risk, half of the factors that'll drive that decision making around, taking that risk is inside of them. Capabilities, confidence to use those capabilities. But it's only half. Half is actually in their environment, in the culture on their team. The team being the fundamental unit where culture exists. So just think about that. We do this training, we we take them away, we put them back, and now they're in the same culture, which hasn't changed. And we wonder, gosh, why aren't they taking more risks? I mean, it drives me crazy, quite frankly. And so for anyone listening, if you are going to do this effectively, you got to sit there and really understand that for anyone to execute any behavior, half is inside of them. So, we need to talk about how do we skill them up in micro ways that, that gets traction. That's only half. But the other half is what do we do in the environment that they're in? And I think for me, what gets me excited is that after 25 years in this kind of field, we were frustrated that on our training side, we weren't getting the traction that we wanted. And so, having this sprint approach, which is like happens at the team kind of level, makes me think, I think we're starting to move the needle in ways we haven't moved it before. And that's really exciting to me. And so, to me, that's one of the ways over, because that individual, you said it, they care, they want to do well. They just sometimes don't know how to do well for their team. And so that's kind of our approach, which is, to really signal from the CEO that this matters, right? That culture change matters. You don't do culture just, quite frankly, even just to increase engagement. You do culture change to execute your strategy, because people are so busy. They don't want something that's just a night, oh, I have to do it. HR says I have. No, it's got to enable them to actually achieve their results.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, to edify your point, JP, I became friends a little over a year ago with Gary Ridge, who is the longtime CEO of WD-40. The first time I talked to him, when he took over WD-40, they were mostly in the United States, I think a little bit in Australia, no global presence, hadn't grown in years. And, Gary is known for being a marketing genius. He can sell the roof off of anything. And so I said, you've seen this incredible growth in your 20-year career as a CEO. I forgot what it was, quadrupled the market cap of the company. They're in every country around the world. Just incredible growth, all while having like 90% employee engagement level. So an amazing culture. But, I asked them, so, what was it? Did you come up with a great marketing strategy? He's like, no, the strategy was already there. When I got there, the strategy was in place. The culture wasn't there. There
yes.
wasn't a culture ready for growth. And so he just focused all on culture, and that's what enabled the growth.
Yeah. I love that, because it's kind of what you said earlier. You can have a great culture, but if you don't have you can have a great strategy, but if you're not able to execute that strategy because of your culture, that's an issue. And so,
Yeah.
and in some ways, you and our organization have done things just slightly different. And I think they're actually quite, kind of complementary.
Oh, yeah.
We've said, we're going to give this structure to people leaders to own the culture on their team using these sprints and, in the flow of work, like in their regular team meetings. So it's, but you have an interesting kind of approach as well. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, Matt.
Sure. Yeah, so we talked about, the first step is just always reminding ourselves, getting frequent reminders of what our true job is. My true job is to inspire greatness in my team by serving as a coach, right?
Yep.
And that's really the key move. If you can live as though, my job is to help people win. Oh, great question, Richard. I think we'll come back to that. We'll have a little Q&A time here.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about that. If you view yourself as a coach, that just changes, when you're talking about like how you give feedback, how people might feel like they're not successful at it. It's because if we're coming at it from the perspective of I'm a boss, it doesn't ever work. If you come at it from my job is to help you succeed, to help you win, that people can feel that. So great leaders inspire excellence. They don't have to demand it. But the more that we operate from this perspective of my job is to inspire greatness by serving as a coach who helps people to thrive, the second step is obvious, right? Well, I need to identify what do people need to thrive. Luckily, we have decades of research telling us what people need. By my lights, there are 14 needs that are essentially universal. Everyone has them. No matter what country they're in, what culture, what language, what type of organization, doesn't matter. There are 14 that research demonstrates with fairly good evidence that everyone needs these, and 4 of them are pretty core. So then, of course, the next step is fairly obvious. We need to get regular feedback on how well are we meeting these needs. And we've already talked about how we tend to do that with an annual survey, which doesn't help. And for me, that was the big insight is it's like, well, surveys aren't really helping engagement. In fact, they're often hurting it because we do it in big chunks. And then leadership development isn't really changing anything. And I think it's because we do that in big chunks. It's like if I told you, JP, hey, JP, right now I bench 250, on the bench. I do 250 on the bench press. I want to get to 325. Here's what I'm going to do. I am going to go to the gym for the next 3 days, no food, no sleep, and I'm just going to pump iron. I'm going to go from 250 to 325. You're going to tell me I'm crazy, right? But if I said, JP, over the next year, I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to lift 3 days a week. I'm going to try to get from 250 to 325. You'd say, well, of course. So I think this is, you've been alluding to this. I think that's the big issue with the leadership development side is that we tend to see it as a one-off project in the same way we often think of surveys as a one-off project. So for me, the big insight was to get feedback in a way that gives you the data you want, that actually helps people to feel heard quickly. It needs to be done in small chunks. In the same way, training needs to be done in small, little bite-sized micro trainings, as to your point, that people don't even have to leave the office. It's right in the flow of work, so they can immediately start practicing. And for best results, those two things are synchronized. And when we synchronize them, this amazing synergistic effect happens. So there's a few results of this. One is that training is much more effective, right? So if we're getting this regular feedback in tiny little bits, what you can do, you had mentioned earlier how important it is to respond quickly with meaningful action, right? Well, here's a hack for everyone who thinks that that is a challenge, because it normally is a tremendous challenge. Everyone gets together and plans, how you're going to respond, and you want to get buy-in. Here's a simple way. So there's 2 types of surveys, right? You have exploratory surveys where you're asking questions you don't know the answers to. You can't plan for that. There's also surveys where you're measuring progress on things that you should be doing, i.e. meeting these 14 universal needs people have for thriving. So here's the hack. Before you send a survey out, have a plan for how you're going to respond. So if you're a big organization, have a little 5-minute video micro training that helps people immediately respond to their feedback with some type of meaningful action. And now, for one, as we alluded to, this makes training much more effective. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do a day of training, just like I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do an annual survey. But if you're going to do a day of training, it should be followed up with these little micro trainings, because everyone's aware of this, right? How many of you have been in a training? You thought it was awesome. You took notes. You were inspired. Then you got back to the office on Monday. Reality punched you in the face, and a day went by, Then 2 days went by. Then a week went by, and you might have done one thing out of that full day of training that's different. If we want to get change that's lasting, we need to develop little habits over time. So a little bit of training, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4 to practice. A little bit of training, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 4 to practice. And this synergistic effect makes it so that, one, you get lasting behavior change when you do training, but also this allows you to show meaningful action within days. I mean, literally, you could have a survey go out, you close it, managers get their results 2 days later or the next day, along with a training on how they could respond, show some type of meaningful action, and start practicing that behavior. And this will blow employees' minds away. I mean, Gallup has found that in organizations where employee engagement is nearly 3 times higher in organizations where employees strongly agree with the following statement: my organization acts upon the results of surveys I complete. Just doing that is predictive of 3 times higher employee engagement. So this is the synergistic effect that I find just absolutely inspiring about I think there is a way to consistently increase engagement. And I think if more organizations were doing this, we would see improvement over the next 20 years, significant improvement.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this approach, Matt, is it really takes into consideration the science of human behavior. And for those on the webinar who kind of know of our work, if you've come to this because you know some of our work, you know that it's really big to us, right? You know, we survey 40,000 people a month, and we are really serious about, you know, what's the latest in the kind of the world, the science of human behavior, and what can we bring in? And so one of the things is that we know that, you know, getting, again, no, it's not always 40 or 50, but getting data back from 40 or 50 items, oh my God, what do you do with that? Our brain can't, you know, make sense of that. But if you do it really piecemeal, micro, you know, 1 or 2 questions, and that's part of your approach, isn't it, Matt? So it's bite-sized, it's manageable. I can take action on this. And again, just like it's so hard to understate this, even for people to say thank you for the survey, I can't get over how that is so meaningful, or that you do one small thing. But what's the number that you guys then survey in this approach?
I think the best practice is, I mean, there's a number of ways you can do it, right? So you could, if you're doing one annual survey, you could do little micro surveys where you're literally asking 1 question or 2 about a specific behavior.
Yeah.
I think the best overall approach is, so you have these 14 universal needs, of which I think 4 are absolutely core. So are people finding meaning at work? Are they growing? Is their workplace environment having an overall positive impact on their well-being? And is the workplace environment conducive to excellence? Because believe it or not, my friends, we all want to be excellent. Nobody wakes up in the morning. I mean, think about this, JP. Let's imagine somebody wakes up in the morning, looks themselves in the mirror, first thing after their alarm goes off, and says, today, I would like to be mediocre.
Yeah.
And not just today, but every day for the rest of my life, right? And nobody says that. But we see mediocre people all over the place. And I think part of that is back to your point about environment. For those of you who have not read Atomic Habits by James Clear, I imagine most of you have. I think it's sold 25 million copies at this point. But to me, the most striking finding from his book, so this is arguably the world's leading expert on habits, of all the people he's ever measured for habit formation, of all the meta research he did on habit formation, he has literally never, I'm going to say that again for emphasis, never seen a person, regardless of how highly disciplined they are, no matter how much willpower they have, he has never seen a person succeed consistently in an environment that's conducive to bad habits. Never. Conversely, people who have been underperforming in the past, you put them in the right environment, they can become world champions. So that's how important environment is. And this is such an opportunity for us as leaders, is we can serve as coaches to help bring out the best in people. We're meeting a core need that people have that most people find very hard to meet on their own. You just said you got off of a call with a Fortune 100 CEO. Why does he pay you to coach him? He's one of the best leaders on the planet, because we all know we can continue growing with that outside third party objective view, right? The best athletes in the world all have coaches. So
Yeah.
you can give that to your employees. It's a gift to them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. You know, some of my favorite data point of the last 25 years is that high performers make mistakes like anyone. In fact, there's an argument they make more mistakes because they take more risks, but high performers make mistakes. That's not the point of this. High performers make mistakes, but they extract 3 to 5 times more information from the same opportunity to learn, including mistakes, as the average. And that's it, right? Like that's the exciting part. Can we get
That's
better? Can we use feedback, surveys, whatever, informal,
absolutely.
formal?
And that makes coming to work fun. So when we
Yeah,
have, to me, the coaching mindset and the learning mindset are synonymous, right?
yeah,
So what does a good coach do? Let's say you come to me, JP, and you say, hey, Matt, I had this problem I'm working on. What would you do with this? Now, I could just tell you the answer if I know it, right? But that's not what a good coach does. A
right.
good coach says, JP, can you tell me more about the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah,
Tell me
yeah,
more about it, please.
yeah,
I'm going to ask a dozen follow-up questions. And if I truly am curious, it's not going to come off as an interrogation. It's
yeah,
going to come off as I'm helping you clarify the problem. I'm going to probably walk you through the solution. You're going to come up with the solution on your own.
yeah,
And it's the same as learning. So if we come to work and we see that, like, I'm not just here to do a job, I have
yeah,
an opportunity to grow myself
yeah,
every day, 1%, my ability to execute on my job description and my ability to treat human beings well, to be a better coach who helps people to thrive. Now you can wake up excited every day to come to work, and that is contagious. People start mirroring that learning coaching mindset. And now feedback isn't something we want to avoid.
yeah,
The great leaders crave this, right? It's like, I want all the feedback I can get on where I can do better. And that, that learning is just that's why it's one of the core needs, right? If we're not growing,
yeah,
we're dying. And
yeah,
literally, I mean, like, there are brain cells dying every day
yeah.
that you're not growing. So
No, it's so true. Now, Richard asked this good question, you know, and we're talking about coaching, learning. How do you measure the success of coaching, Matt?
well, I might want to ask him a follow-up question. So Richard, could you clarify, are you talking about measuring the success of having an external coach for a leader, or measuring the success that managers are coaching their team members?
Hmm. It's great. It's great. Great clarification, clarifying question.
I would answer both, but they're probably slightly different. So um, the latter. So, okay, so leaders coaching their team members. So I think this is a great reason to have a monthly pulse. Is if you're effective as a coach, you should see tangible examples without even doing a survey of people, to JP's point, feeling safer to take risks. Why is that? Well, because if I'm a coach, let's say if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, Matt, I just totally failed this project and we missed our goal." There's two ways, there's a lot of ways that can react, but let's just keep it simple. There's two ways, right? The basic, I could be visibly upset in my face and start asking questions that start with, why did you do this? Accusing, putting the person on the defensive.
Yeah.
And guess what's going to happen over time? Even if it's just subtle, or if I look a little bit upset and I'm asking why questions, people are going to stop coming to me with bad news. And
Yeah.
if people stop coming to me with bad news, I'm going to fail, right?
Yeah.
So the other way I could respond is simply, tell me more about that.
Right.
Now, when somebody hears that, they're like, wait a second. I just told him I totally botched this. I missed the goal that was important, and that he's not upset. He actually wants to hear more about it with no judgment. Now people realize, look, our number one goal is learning. And there you're going to have a person who's not shutting down.
Yeah.
They're not going to be afraid to take risks, and they're not going to be afraid to come to you with bad news. So you will see tangible results where people will collaborate better. They'll be more engaged, and you should be able to measure that. If you're doing a monthly pulse, if you're just asking those what we recommend is you're asking 4 questions. Are you finding meaning? Are you growing? Is the environment conducive to excellence? And is the environment having an overall positive impact on your well-being? Those should go up over time if you're effectively coaching, because ultimately that's what coaching is about. Coaching is about, how do I help this person to thrive, not just professionally, but as a human being as well? And that thriving will have tangible results in both work performance, their interactions with others. I mean, I've literally had team members, I have weekly one-to-ones with all my direct reports. One week is more about, I call it coaching to win, where we're talking about, hey, where are you stuck? Where are you trying to grow, whether it's work-wise or outside? And then the next week is just like, hey, what can I do to help you better thrive, whether it's at work or away from work? Like, what are areas where you're stuck outside of work, if you want to share? I have team members who are asking me about, hey, I've had this disagreement with a loved one. What advice do you have for helping me or for helping overcome this? And I love that, because I know that if that person's thriving outside of work, if their personal relationships are solid, they're bringing their best selves to work. And I mean, I wouldn't even have cared if that wasn't the case. I mean, I just like helping because I like seeing people thrive. But the side effect is you will see that performance at work. So a lot of these traits, like I'm sure JP is, I apologize if you talk about this ad nauseum, but emotional intelligence in particular is learned implicitly. You can't learn it through words. And so that also means it's transferable. It's contextually transferable. So if you're developing good coaching skills, good listening skills, good curiosity at work, you will have that in your personal life, and your relationships will be richer, and vice versa. If you're practicing that outside of work, it'll come to work. So sorry, that was a long answer, but in summary, the 2 things are, you should see tangible results in terms of, I notice engagement and collaboration improving on the team, and you should be able to measure that with monthly pulse surveys.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Richard. I love the questions. And, we're kind of coming to the end. When you think of, you've got a busy manager leader, what's the one thing they could do to help? Like, you and I are in agreement here. It's less about HR. It's less about the CHRO, CEO owning stuff. It's that people leader. They own 70% of the difference, really, data-wise, of that impact on engagement. What's the one thing we hear coaching, we hear different things. What's the one thing, people who are listening, what could they do to kind of increase engagement for their folks based on your work, Matt, would you say? If there's like one takeaway from today.
Well, you mean one thing to go do immediately other than rewrite your job description?
Yeah, exactly. Although that's a good one, though. Although I like that one. That's a really, let's make sure we remember, right? Everyone, you got a job description. If it's not part of your job description, do you have that almost meta job description around development and helping people and inspiring them? But which I actually really love that one. But yeah, one more.
So we have that, which is the first step in the process. And then again, this is a process, right? These 4 steps of reminding yourself of your true job, identifying what people need to thrive, getting regular feedback on how well we're meeting those needs, and responding to that feedback with meaningful action as quickly as possible. Those are the 4 steps. So engaging in that process. So I'll try to give 3 takeaways. So engaging with that process as soon as possible, even if it's just hacking something together,
for sure,
the better. Okay. The first step we've already talked about, just rewrite your job description. Remind yourself continuously that your primary job, of course, you have lots of duties, but your primary job is to inspire greatness. But then let's just talk about maybe one specific way to meet one of these 14 universal needs. Sure. So here's one of my favorites, because I think it's the most leveraged activity. Appreciation. Everyone needs to feel appreciated, and it meets all 4 of the core needs. When people feel appreciated, their well-being is enhanced. They're more likely to do great work. They're finding more meaning because they know they're making an impact. And they're more likely to grow because they're like, I should do more of this. I'm being appreciated for it, right? You appreciate what you want to hear the most of. Oh, thank you, Taylor. Thanks for dropping a note. So here's a simple way to make a new habit, all right? most managers, if you ask them, are you sharing appreciation frequently? They'll say, yeah, I tell people thank you all the time. You ask the same direct reports and they'll say, I almost never hear thank you. And the reason is because the words I just used, we're often saying thank you. Most people don't process information primarily through the auditory sense. We need to see it, sometimes feel it. So here's a habit. This very simple thing you can do takes you 5 minutes a day, and this could be life-changing, which I'll come back to in a second. What I'd like you to do is create an event on your calendar, or if you don't use a calendar, just create an alarm on your phone sometime mid-afternoon. And it's just a 5-minute event. When it goes off, what I'd like you to do is think back through the day, who did something right today? Who lived a core value? Who met expectations? It doesn't even have to exceed expectations, but just meeting expectations. And then give them a sincere, specific thank you. Hey, JP, I saw how you took 15 extra minutes with one of your direct reports to walk her through this solution that she was trying to come up with. And I can't tell you how important this is. Coaching is one of the most important skills we try to develop here. Being a servant leader is one of our core values. That's what allows employees to be very engaged. And that's what creates a culture that people want to be a part of. I can't thank you enough. I put that in writing and I go tell the person the same thing. Wow. That's an impactful thank you. So if you do this, just catching one person a day, for one, people will feel much more appreciated. Engagement will go up. But this could be life-changing for you. Why? Because we are wired to scan for the negative, to find what's wrong in our environment. True. And if we can create a habit of scanning for the positive, Matthew Huberman, who's a well-known neuroscientist, according to his meta-research, the most important thing we can do to be happy and successful, according to him, is just have 3 genuine things that we're thankful for every day, that practice. So this is very much aligned with that. You're scanning for the positive, finding what you can be thankful for, and demonstrating that appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that last one. As Peter Taylor was saying, it's like catching people doing something right. And you're right, our brain we do amplify. We're looking for the negative to protect ourselves. We're at the end of our hour. I want to thank everyone for jumping on, being part of this. Matt, for people to know more about your work, how could they find out more?
I'm pretty easy to Google Matt Tenney, and it's Tenney. MattTenney.com is the main website.
And if people aren't, like, as a good little hack, I always try to connect. Tenney, Tenn, is also the state he lives in. So that's just like
Tennessee. That's right.
There you go. There you go. It's funny. We work with a client, Tenneco, and I didn't realize until, into the engagement that Tenneco actually started as Tennessee Co. I know. So there you go. Now I'm a little more sensitive. Hey, listen, Matt, I knew we'd have fun talking. Thank you so much. Great value. I love your book. I think there's just so many nuggets. Yes, Travis, absolutely. So many great nuggets here. And so, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Adrian, I'll pass it over to you, but thank you, Adrian, for your work to get us organized, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you, JP.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Just want to thank everyone for attending today. Feel free to visit our website at ihhp.com to learn more about our emotional intelligence solutions and our last 8% culture system. Also, just please check your email in the coming days. We'll be sending you a recording of the webinar and lots of additional information and resources. And I really just want to thank JP and Matt again for what a great, insightful conversation. As everyone was saying, so much goodness in that hour. So we hope to all see you again at the next webinar. Thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Adrian and JP. Thank you, everyone.